Hi, this is Tiffany Gray, and I'm here today interviewing Joy Rogers. The date is December 13th, 2023, and we are interviewing via Zoom for Georgia State University's women's collection, and as part of our Feminist Action Alliance research project. How are you doing today, Joy?
Just fine.
Great. Well, today I'd like to start, if you don't mind, just giving us a little bit of background information, maybe where you were born, grew up, some of your family dynamics.
I actually was born in South Georgia in Tifton, and my father was in the military and he was being assigned to Korea. And so my mother went home to be with her family. And my first 2 years of life was with her family while he was abroad. And my aunts and uncles were in junior high and high school at the time. And then we moved about um, with his assignments throughout mostly the Southeast, up in the DC, Maryland area. And then my first 3 years of school were in Germany, where he was assigned. And then we came back to Kentucky. And in Germany, we had a brand new school that looked just like any American school would look like. When I came back to Kentucky, I was in a one-room schoolhouse with outdoor toilets, and a striking difference. But it didn't really impress me for whatever reason. It was like a fact of life, but it did not. It wasn't the overbearing thing about it, but looking back on it, it seems quite striking. So anyway, and ultimately we settled in Huntsville, Alabama for my high school. And we had my junior year was in Georgia, then we went back to Alabama. So lots of moves and making new friends and learning new environments. And then I went to school at University of Alabama, and then came to Atlanta to seek my fortune, and then started to go back to graduate school at Georgia State while I was working, and got an MBA in international business. And so that's the background. Mother and father, one younger sister.
Fascinating. Do you feel like your time moving around and both out of the country kind of helped influence your education path and your career path?
For some reason, I was always interested in international. I remember writing a paper in high school about, I'm trying to think what the organization is. They place high school students. They've been around forever. And I remember I wrote a paper about that. So I've always been interested in different ways that societies and cultures function. And so that's, um, I'm sure it was influenced a little bit by what I experienced as a child, but for whatever reason, it was a strong, strong interest. And ultimately, I've had some opportunities to do some things abroad over the years, and but I always, but they were short time, a couple of months maybe, and I always wanted to know what it was like to function as a foreigner in another country, as opposed to a guest or a tourist or a short-term employee. What would they get an idea of what it was like to be foreign? And so anyway, in 2010, I got a opportunity to work for about a year and a half in Istanbul, and satisfied that interest.
Well, that sounds fantastic. How amazing. Um, were there any, as you were growing up, any influential figures or individuals that influenced your, again, kind of your direction or your thoughts and feelings about you, the world, kind of your interests?
Um, my parents, particularly my mother, and moving around, we lived in World War II barracks that had been converted into apartments in my eighth grade. Um, and just at one time in Maryland, I know with me and my sister, we were living, we rented a room with a family that had five children. I think maybe it was their upstairs they were renting out. We were somewhat temporary. We don't know exactly how long we were going to be there, and it didn't make sense to have a thing. So I know as an adult looking back, I thought my mother never complained. She never said, "Oh, we have to make another move. Oh, this place is terrible." Oh, she never complained. And I feel quite certain that that's why my sister and I accepted it, and I can remember as an eighth grader, we were moving from Kentucky to Alabama, and I had good friends there. And I can remember thinking, we're going to a new place, there'll be new people to meet. And it was always, I remember distinctly that particular move. My, I had no regrets that we were moving. I was anticipating uh, new opportunities in the new location. So I can't think of, I had good teachers all along the way that certainly influenced me. But I think my parents' approach to life uh, and stability and openness to new ideas and new places and people. And even though my parents were both from the South, neither of them ever voiced any um, racial discrimination, which I have no idea outside of the fact that my father was in the military and in Germany, his superior was a black man. And so not sure why they managed to come out that direction, but they did.
No, that's wonderful. Parents are huge influencers on their kids. Absolutely. So as you when you went off to college then at Ole Miss, right? University of Alabama,
Alabama, Alabama.
Alabama. What do you feel like you encountered there that maybe helped contribute to the path that you ultimately pursued, both career-wise and then eventually into the women's movement in the 1970s?
I wasn't a member of a sorority, and the but they had a student council of some sort, and they had independents that were on a board, I guess, of some sort. I remember, I think it was my sophomore or junior year, I ran for a position. Funny thing is, I can't really remember that I was selected. So I almost think I must not have been because I don't have a clear memory of meetings or anything like that. Um, but I was active. There was a student organization called ISEC. It's a French acronym, Association Internationale Economics and Students. And their role was after World War II to foster international understanding by internships, I will say, students going to other countries and working. And at the time, Alabama actually had one of the most active chapters in the country because Alabama businesses were very um, strong in supporting the university. And so they would take students so that Alabama students could be successful and have an opportunity to go abroad. More, I think, than for most of them than what the foreign student was going to do for them. And so, but at that time, women planned the parties and wrote the letters and the correspondence, typed the letters and correspondence, maybe made appointments or did things, but they were not in any leadership role in the organization. I became friends with several of the guys that were. Some went on to New York to be president and played other roles in the national organization. Um, I applied for an internship. I was not selected. And so I was going to do what they called reception for the summer of planning social activities for the foreign students that came over. So if you call that a role, it was a role of an officer. And then I was selected for an internship in Helsinki, Finland, and so I turned that over to another guy who actually happened to go and be president in national at a later time. But when I came to Georgia State, this is coming back working a year or so at the Fed and was working at Georgia State. I became president of the, the local chapter that was at Georgia State. I did a regional conference, and at the regional conference, they had not planned for their December national conference, and they said, "Hey, you should do the national conference." I said, "Oh, I'm going to get a full-time job." I was working part-time. "Oh, you can do it." Anyway, so I did wind up raising all the money and all the logistics for the national conference of ISEC. So those things gave me experience making calls on executives. I made a call on the president of Coca-Cola and the I can't remember what the title would be, but the head of the Federal Reserve and other businesses asking for their support in either the conference or in providing traineeships. So it gave me, and also arranging the regional and the national conference gave me logistical experiences.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, did all of this predate any of your time and experience with feminist action?
Yeah, all this was before. This would have been ISEC was while I was in Alabama, and then the Georgia State part was like, let me just think about this, probably 1970. And I think it was like 73 or so when I first encountered Feminist Action Alliance.
So, could you speak a little bit about what kind of led you into the kind of the women's movement then? It sounds like you took advantage of a lot of opportunities as they came, but was there anything in particular that really started to speak to you and draw you more to wanting to be involved in women's rights and women's opportunities?
Well, I was reading a lot of books. I had put a goal on myself to kind of not stop learning after school, and I thought, well, one thing I could do is read a book. So I was read a book once a month, and so I'd read a lot of the feminist literature of the time. I can't even remember the classics, but uh, when I remember, I will tell you. But they were. And the other thing is, I was just talking to Morna earlier about some experiences of employment, seeking employment, and the difficulties of getting the kind of job that I was looking for. And so those personal experiences of being turned down and my reading um, reinforced that it wasn't a personal problem that I was having, that these were systemic problems that were not, had been in place for a long time and weren't going to go away in a short time. And so the thought was, what can you do? What, if anything, can you do? And so there was my first interaction was I was living over near Emory, and there was this little thing. I hope it's in my papers, but I haven't been able to find it yet. The headline, it's in the Atlanta Journal, is Feminists Meet. That was the headline. It was hardly two paragraphs, buried somewhere in the paper. And it was a Saturday morning meeting that was going to be held at Emory, and it was talking about how women could have more of a role in politics. And so my next door neighbor and I walked the railroad tracks because that was the closest way to get to Emory to attend this meeting. And it was hosted by Feminist Action Alliance. And it also happened that a guy I knew was running for Congress at the time, and I was going to be working in his campaign. So it appealed to me because I would get some experience that would help me in his campaign, and also because it was women coming together to make a difference in the political environment. So that was my first exposure, and I met Anne, and her husband at the time, Fred Vetter, was one of the panelists, and it was very few people. It was, I don't know, I don't even think they had like multiple sessions at the same time. It was nothing like what we did at Georgia State in 75 or 6. It was very much just a small group of people in one room with these panels. So anyway, but it turned out that Fred was the chair of my friend's campaign that he was running. And so I saw him and Ann periodically during the campaign that fall. And then Ann just said about the action and when the campaign was over that she looked forward for me coming to some of the meetings that Action was having, which I did. And I was very impressed in my first meeting. I don't think I'd ever seen a meeting run as smoothly as what Peg Nugent did. Start, move on, move on, move on, make something happen. It was no miscellaneous chatting. It was very directed, excellent, excellent meeting. And I was very impressed. And so then I joined.
No, that's wonderful. Uh, one peg we've kind of noticed is that Anne has been just, I'll call her a gatherer, if you will. Has been great
Mhm.
at gathering women into
Yes.
action. That seems to be one connection we've seen. So then when you went to this first meeting and then any subsequent meetings, can you kind of describe maybe how the meetings flowed and what kind of energy you felt in these meetings as women were coming together to discuss projects or opportunities or goals? Um,
The first meeting, just to emphasize, I think something that's important is very small number of people. I mean, I don't know that there were 15 people in the room. And um, I don't have a clear memory of exactly. I remember that first meeting very clearly. I don't remember. It clearly was at the end of the year, and so Peg went away. That was the end of her time period, and then I think Ann and Heather must have taken over then the January the next year, and I I have to look at my notes now to see what year was that. You may remember more than I do without me looking. The conference, I think 75 was women, 76 was women at work. I think 75, I think, was the women in politics at Georgia State. So I was I was the chair of the political task force in 75 and put that conference together at Georgia State. And that was really, if you want to call it, the big time. We had multiple sessions going on simultaneously and different tracks depending on what you wanted to do. And we got much more exposure as opposed to Feminist Meet with 2 paragraphs. We got Celestine Sibley to write an article on the conference, and she did an excellent job. And we had a huge turnout for us compared to the small group we had at Emory. This was huge, and we had the mayor and representatives from the legislature and um, lots more politicians. Um, we didn't have any politicians at the small grouping that we had at Emory. So it was, if, as far as what, again, trying to make a difference. A part, I think, for all of us is we had an opportunity to run things with action that we did not have in our jobs, to make decisions and pull things together and everything. We were not necessarily doing those. And so action allowed us to develop skills and learn, really, develop new skills and refine the skills that we already had. And so at the time, I had moved from the Fed over to, well, I'd gone to England and worked at a merchant bank. And then I worked at a merchant bank, and then I traveled for 3 months. And then I came back and to finish my degree and seek my fortune. And I wasn't getting any job offers. And so I was working part-time and finishing the degree. And I wound up working at Economic Opportunity Atlanta, which was Johnson's poverty program. And because Atlanta was so prominent in the civil rights movement, um, they had their grant request into the federal government immediately when the legislation was passed, and was one of the first to be funded and developed. And so I started in a economic development kind of position. My professor at Alabama had said it didn't matter whether you were working inner city or you were working in South America, the economic principles were the same. But Nixon came on board, and this was a discretionary grant, and he canceled it. And so I wasn't there a month or two, and the job went away. But I got another job within AOA, do assistant director of the Head Start program. I had no background in early childhood, but this job was really management and um, finance. So I had the budget, and all of the center directors, all of the janitors, all of the cooks, all the bus drivers, all of those staff reported up through me. The director had like 7 professionals, healthcare and education, whatever, but all the rest of the headcount reported to me. And so that was where I was working while I was doing the Feminist Action Alliance conferences, et cetera.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, in my notes, the in 1975 you became the political task force director, and that was when the first Women in Politics events happened. And then you held that same position again in 76. And were you also a part of planning the second Women in Politics event? Um,
I have a fuzzy memory of that. I think I was, because I think that's the only position I had, was chair of the Political Action Committee. And so in the fall of 76, I went to work for IBM. And the other members of, I was the only person, pretty much the only person working for private business at that time. Everybody else was working for the federal government or for other nonprofits. We did have a couple of lawyers that had their own business, but most everybody was working in another capacity. And so you should do something about business was the direction I was being told. And so that's the reason behind Women at Work. That's how it started. And so, needless to say, without a lot of um, just newly arrived. There was, but I was the private business person to start working. But we did a great job. Everybody worked very, very hard on this. And somewhere, I haven't been able to find it. Was talking to Morna about my papers, but somewhere I think I must have another box because I put together very, very distinctive. What is our purpose? And a paragraph. How are we going to go about doing this? What are the committees? I made suggestions of committee members on each page of the committee. What is the goal? And I think Suzanne had a different opinion than I did, but I distinctly remember writing this. Our goal is not to put on a conference. This is not our goal. This is our means. Our goal is to introduce ourselves to businesses. And the way we are going to do that is through this conference. And so I wanted everybody to be very clear about what our objective was. And like I said, Suzanne has a different idea, but that was what I was trying to accomplish. Clearly, we put out some good information. We helped networking. We had a career fair. Clearly, there was benefit to the women who attended the conference, but that was not the overriding objective of the conference. And one anecdote I wanted to tell you was so I, needless to say, said nothing at work about my activities. Now, this there was an organization that recognized women in not-for-profit organizations. And so I was nominated and I was selected as one of the 10 outstanding young women of Atlanta through this not-for-profit stuff. And I said nothing at work about anything. And lo and behold, somebody saw it because it was published in the newspaper. And they actually put it on a plaque and they gave it to me. And I thought, well, that was very, very, very nice. But I said nothing. And we were on the list due to Heather's very good work of public relations with the radio TV stations to do public service announcements. They aired them at 1 and 2 in the morning. And so we talked about either something we were doing or about a public issue or something. It was like 3 minutes, maybe. Lo and behold, I'm working, and my boss and his boss, my second line manager, show up and they come over. Somebody had seen that at 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning and had blurted them. I do not think they saw it. I think somebody saw it and told them about it. And they were like, what is this Feminist Action Alliance? And there was a smile on their face. It was not accusatory or anything, but it was very much something that they had to leave their office because I worked in another physical location and come there and whatever. So net, I said a few things, and then my second line manager invited me to come and talk to them. So, and apply for some money. They had money. How about that? And so Heather and Ann went with me, dressed in our nicest suits. We had prepared a presentation, to hand out and leave with them, etc. Very impressed. He was very impressed. So after they leave, he says, I'm not sure I quite understand. Is this like Toastmistress? Clearly, whatever we said, which we said exactly politics and education, we were doing things in the schools, et cetera. We listed everything. But it obviously, he could not really put us in a box. He couldn't really understand exactly what we were trying to do. And I think he was floored that we came dressed and did such a formal presentation, because I think they do Trout Unlimited money. And I think somebody just says, give me $100. And so they don't put together a presentation or anything. So he wasn't used to people putting such a formal request together or putting such a background whatever in front of them. So just to tell you, that was early on experience, and that was before we had done the Women at Work conference. But that was some of the background and with them.
No, that is a very fun story. Um, if you don't mind, I'm gonna backpedal just a little bit because one thing I'm seeing is that you were very significant in helping draw people in to participate in some of these larger conferences and being willing to reach out to the political leaders for the Georgia Women in Politics and then for business leaders. Could you maybe kind of talk about what efforts you went through to reach out to those individuals and invite them or to correspond with them?
I I don't know exactly what we have to credit um, the the willingness of people to be at that Women in Politics conference. When Carter was running for president, trying to remember his name now, he was his PR guy and very, very prominent. And he was at our conference, and very busy time for them. And I remember distinctly, he really wasn't all that effective because his mind was so much national, and what we were focused on was more local. So his comments were not in sync really, but the fact that he took the time to attend is really quite something. And so I'd like to take credit for all we did, but for some, I also think it was the time. I think people were, I think we gave them a vehicle, just like we gave a vehicle for individual women to participate. I think it was a time that the politicians were beginning to see that this was an audience they needed to address. And that's I have no basis of fact for saying that, but um, and we had a reputation for being reasonable. We Our whole approach had never been to demonstrate, to try to get something to change. We were very much, how do you work in the system to make a change? And so we, just like IBM, people were impressed with they didn't think they would have to be ashamed to be associated with us, and then that the conference would be a success and that they would get some good publicity and they would make some good contacts. And then, of course, when we got some people involved, then the other people were like, if it's good enough for them, then it's good enough for me, kind of thing. So it was an endorsement of it. And so I think our good work and our uh, plain old organizing skills. I mean, we were just professional. We just didn't leave anything for chance. It just flowed and it worked. And so I think I think uh, I think that's why we were able to get them. And we got Zell Miller, Lieutenant Governor, I think at the time, and the article, if you haven't seen it yet, I do have that article in my papers from Celestine Sibley. And I was working at EOA at the time and Economic Opportunity Atlanta, the Head Start. And I wrote to her and I called, like, I won't say every day, but as the thing was getting closer, she hadn't written the article. And she had said she would write the article. So we were coming up to the program. And so my calls were almost every day, can you tell me? And this was her secretary, of course. I think the article may have come out on Friday before the conference on Saturday. It was very, very close to the end, but it was a beautiful, as only Celestine Sibley could write, article. And she references Zell Miller and his participation in the conference, because I'd given her all the speakers and the topics and everything of what was going on. But so articles like that from a person like that also helped our name recognition. Uh, and like I said, you didn't have to be embarrassed to be associated with us. Um, and coming back to my old boss, uh, second line manager, he said something. He said, "You realize your name, Feminist Action Alliance, puts, what did he call it? Terror in the hearts of men," or something like that. And so that never struck me. I never thought about that in advance until he said that. But clearly, I don't know, feminists, I don't know, action, alliance. I'm not sure which word was so striking, but it clearly was not easy, not a comfortable a word or association. And so other people, I can only assume, must have had possibly some similar thoughts about an organization titled that. So, but our performance was totally different, totally different. And I can remember when we were doing the Women at Arts with that was Anne and Heather's primary initiative. Uh, we were associating with typical women's organizations. So League, not the League of Women Voters, Junior League, who at the time, it's not that way now, but at the time were mostly wives of professional men. And so when we were introduced, it was a group of, I don't know if they were all junior leagues or there were some other people in the room. And she said, and they all have other jobs as well. She made the comment. So, but for the women in the arts, we were associating with typically women's groups, pulling that together. And but they were not necessarily women who had chosen to be in the workforce. Uh, Clearly capable women, but they had not chosen to be in the workforce. So different. But that also gave us an opportunity to for people to get acquainted with us in a working relationship as opposed to by the name, and subsequently gave us some credibility and exposure through that. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No, that was fantastic. Thank you for sharing all of that. I also noticed too, just in some of the notes that I've gathered, that early on in your time in action, some of the work you also worked on was helping change the rape legislation and kind of helping to work towards getting the Grady Rape Crisis Center up and going. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that work and effort that you remember doing?
Yeah, I wasn't really directly involved with the legislation. With the ERA, we identified the organizations throughout the state that had some activity in the local areas. And somebody knew somebody who had a WhatsApp line, I think is what it was called at the time, where you could make long distance phone calls. So we would go down to this office at night when the business wasn't there, and they allowed us to make phone calls all over the state. And I did that and worked with people in Columbus and people in Augusta and what they were doing, and we were trying to get initiatives throughout the state and in an organized fashion with that. But I think Beth probably had a lot more direct experience with that than I did.
Um, yeah, it in the newsletters, it a lot of that at least initially fell under the political action or the rape, depending on what the newsletter.
That's true. That's absolutely
Yeah.
true because it was legislation, and we actually, as in the news today, you would, I don't know if it said it anywhere, but the legislation we were proposing and copying came from Texas. Texas had a model law that we replicated in what we were trying to get passed in Georgia, which is kind of interesting considering today's events there.
That is an interesting turn. Uh, um, so then in 1977, to move forward a little, you became the president of Action for that year. Could you maybe talk about a little bit about what kind of propelled you into that position and then what you kind of focused on during your time as president of the org?
Um, I think being on the board as the political person, and a lot of our activities were indeed in the political realm, and but seeing the other things that we were working with, et cetera, it was just a natural next step to be president, and so that was that, and just to say, um, it's one of the strengths of Action. I don't know if anybody's talked to you about this, is the fact that we had a lot of coherency and we had a lot of history. And when I left Atlanta and went to New York, I immediately was looking for a women's organization that I could join there. And I found one. It was Women of Westchester. And they'd been around a long time. They were active in the nuclear and the war against the war movement. They were older women than what Action was, is a general sense. But I quickly realized a striking difference that they they didn't have bylaws like we had, or their bylaws weren't constructed like ours. I can't remember now. Maybe they didn't have bylaws because I know I shared our bylaws with them. And then the other thing was they were much more into talk than they were into action. And they were much more into demonstrations. That was their history, kind of where they had come from. So they weren't looking to try to get inside organizations or to influence them from the outside of calling out, the challenges and again demonstrating. But that's kind of being on the outside, trying to make a difference externally, which is hard. And then they also didn't have they talked. Their meetings were talk, but they weren't directed to a goal. They had lots of discussions, but they did not have a target that they were headed for. And the other thing was that Action just naturally developed that the president and vice president rolled over to be the at-large board members. And it wasn't in the bylaws. It was just something that evolved over time, and were strong supporters. Heather worked as hard for me as she did for herself. And she did that for every president, to get them publicity, give them some advice in the very beginning. I think Suzanne told me she did it for her just like she did for me. I think she came over some Saturday and said, this is what you need to do. This was from her experience dealing with the press and all. She tried to get us up and running uh, in good time in our new role. So I think a lot of organizations have trouble with continuity, and they have strong leaders and then they have weak leaders and then maybe they get strong leaders again. And considering that we were only really active for a very short time period, relatively speaking, I think a part of the success was the continuity and the fact that when that we didn't lose what the people who had been president and vice president, that they in turn came over and worked as hard in support of the next uh, president and term as they had worked on their own president, because they were working for the organization and they were working for the goal of making a difference in society for women. They wasn't working for themselves or what they had achieved. And I just think that's uh, we were fortunate. We were fortunate. A lot of organizations are not so fortunate, and so they have low periods, and sometimes they don't come out of them. So anyway, our all of our years were strong until the end.
Yeah, the last couple of years, I know the records get really thin.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I'll be interested in what you learn, and because I really had left by that time. I wasn't in Atlanta, and so I really don't know. Uh, I'm not sure exactly. It seems to me that what I was told is they just were not attracting members. Uh, at, either people didn't see the need for action, that women were having enough success that they weren't they weren't interested in pursuing an organization. I'm really not sure what happened, but they ultimately pulled the plug.
which is sad, I know, especially when you've had such an active part in an organization like this. Because again, that first year you were president, you spearheaded the first Women at Work conference, but then you also were the chair again the second year. And so I was just wondering if you could share, like, were there any dynamic changes that went from one year to the next, or anything that you tried to on that second go around focus or emphasize on and on that second conference for Women at Work?
We made it much bigger because we were overflowing in the first and could not accommodate the the number of people that were interested, which was also, I think, another statement to the need at the time and the demand at the time. There were people who were strongly looking for opportunities to come together and learn, etc. And the so we made it much bigger, and we had a larger career fair with businesses participating, and we we grew it, um, and um, and again you build on your success. So uh, the we had return customers, our business people and our speakers uh, felt it was worth their time and energy, and so many of them returned to participate again. And then we were also able to get other businesses because of the names and the people that we had had in the beginning. So um, we were, and I don't remember if this has come up before, but we always gathered. Our programs were usually on a Saturday, politics, women at work, etc. We would gather several times. We were at my home, and we didn't keep any of our evaluations, I don't think, but we always did evaluations, and what was right, what could be better, whatever. Like I said, we were much more professional, I think, than most organizations, and none of us had done this outside of the national conference and stuff that I'd done. I don't think most of us had done anything like this, but we always did an appraisal. So anyway, we would gather on Saturday night to watch our press, because Saturday's a slow press day. So the news media was always at our conferences. And so they would always have some kind of a blip on the Saturday evening news. So we wanted to see our blip. And then we would read our evaluations and have something to eat and drink and talk about the day and what had gone well and what had not gone well and what we might do differently, et cetera, and take a moment to bask in completing our task. But we learned a lot from the evaluations. Of what we were hitting at the right spot, what other topics might be things that we might should include. And pretty much everybody liked the speakers. Nobody too much had comments to say about the speakers, but we did get ideas about topics and things that people might like.
Well, I have good news for you. A lot of the evaluations are in the Emory files.
Oh, they are. Well, I'm so glad. I want to know who. I know Janet Falk and one of our other secretaries, I think, put some papers into Emory, but I really don't know who contributed. Do they say on there?
Uh-huh. So I don't know who gave them the
Okay.
files,
Okay.
but I've been looking. There's 8 boxes from
Oh my
Emory.
goodness. Okay.
Yeah. And so I just finished looking at the Women at Works box. And my next box is the Georgia Women in Politics box
Oh
to
my
go through
goodness.
all of the papers and everything. So,
Oh my
um,
goodness gracious. I'm so glad somebody got the evaluations. I have no idea who did, but that's wonderful.
they are hiding right now in the special collections at Georgia State while I go through.
Okay.
Um, which does bring up an interesting question or thought. One thing I noticed in both Women at Politics and the Women at Work, you you as a group put together a training manual on how to do these things. Could you maybe talk about what kind of spurred you to do that? Because I noticed you actually ended up selling copies of those
Yes.
and they ended
I
up being
think
quite popular.
I think what started is they did a manual like that for the programs they were doing in the schools of non-career jobs. So I think that was the first foray into a how-to deal. And I don't really remember exactly how we advertised or whatever. And I did not put the how-to together, so I'm not sure exactly who put the how-to together. But I do have correspondence when I get it to you that a woman from California wrote me, and it was about the Women at Work conference. And she, I think, had gotten the how-to, and somehow my name phone number or something. I don't know. We didn't have email addresses then, but somehow she had written, that's what it was. She just wrote to the organization and the letter got to me. And she was very impressed with what we had done. Now, I was very impressed with what they were doing in California. But it's to me the interesting point from a historical perspective is that without the internet and without a lot of communication, somehow the various women's organizations did have some communication and some sharing of information of what was working, what was not working, etc. And so I do have those letters with her that I will share with you, and
Well, that
that
would
all generated from that how to on a Women at Work. So she was following up with some more detailed questions of how do we get businesses to participate and et cetera, et cetera. And they had gone from a small little deal until they were being funded by the state or by the city. They had full-time employees. I was very impressed with what they had done. So anyway, that'll all be documented in what she said about what they were doing out in California. And we were participating with political groups in DC and throughout the country with what they were doing. And they came down and did a training session for us. I don't know if that's in any of the papers, but I think it was the National Women's Political Caucus came down and did a training session for us, a one-day training session. And so there were those kinds of activities, even though Action was a local, homegrown, the buck stops here, there's one chapter, et cetera. There was a lot of communications and sharing of ideas and a lot of newsletters. And we signed up for all the newsletters. And so we were getting um, education in that direction.
Yeah, and looking through the correspondence, because I have copies of a lot of all the president's correspondence through 1980. There were several requests to you and to Suzanne when you guys were president, and Beth for copies of these manuals for these how-tos.
Aha.
Yeah, there's a couple there's one from New Hampshire. You mentioned California, and then I was looking another from Alabama. So it was a very popular resource for other women.
Yeah, I'm not sure who had the original idea with the, like I said, I think it started with the education thing, but it was very creative. And I will tell you that the person who followed me as who you have interviewed, and I don't know, she may have come up in the interview, which was Linda Barr Egber. Um, she was the Fulton County social worker for mothers, really, for families and for mothers. She counseled and gave them advice, etc. And she was on the board of Head Start. So I had met her um, through Head Start and talked to her about action. And she was interested, and she was on the political action committee, and then she moved up to be the political action chair, and then she ultimately was president, and she, of course, started the Women's Network um, group.
Which became a very prominent kind of spinoff from
Yes,
from Action. Now, the first Atlanta Women's Network was in 1979, was in February of that year. Were you a part of starting that as well? Because I know you eventually moved to New York, and I'm not sure the timeline there of when
you're
that
talking
change
about
kind of
the
happened.
Women's Network.
The Women's Network, yeah.
Yeah, actually, my thoughts on that, and I don't remember if we covered that in one of our conference calls earlier or not, but um, being with EOA and with the Black community, there was, I can't remember if it was Pasquale's or there was a restaurant that leaders of the Black community, be it community leaders or individual like us in a organization, would meet for lunch, and they would share information, keep in contact, what was going on, how they might work together, support. But the other big thing is any politician that was going to run for an office, be it city, state, county, or whatever, would go and speak to them. And here were these leaders of these organizations, and they would speak clearly to the issues that they were concerned about, but they were influential people who could bring votes whichever direction they thought were appropriate. My original thoughts on the network was to create a women's organization of women leaders um, that ultimately I wanted a place where politicians could come and speak to a women's audience about women's issues. And we really didn't have, how do you gather women? I mean, they're dispersed, they're all over. So there wasn't a place to address women's issues necessarily at the time. And so I was looking to model what the Black community had done to create a group of women representing many more women in the background that that could say these are the things on our mind, these are the things we care about. What are you as a in mayor or city council, what will you be able to do to help us with these issues? It didn't turn out that way. It turned out to be more of a networking uh, business job creation. And I know in the beginning, again, I was leaving. I went to the first or second meeting, but then I was not here after that. But I know from the comments that people made to me that it it attracted a predominant number of people who were looking for jobs, which is okay. That's what you would expect. But it did not necessarily in the beginning attract the leadership people, um, are the people who had already succeeded and had higher ranking jobs, who might be able to give a hands up or to give some advice and counsel or whatever. It was predominantly the people who were looking to move up or to get that first job or to break into an industry or something. And I really haven't, was outside of the first two meetings, was not involved. So I really not sure what it does today. But it still exists. So that's a point, and how it has evolved, from the beginning, because all organizations evolve. And so I don't know how it's evolved, but it did not coalesce into the organization that I originally was envisioning.
No, it's amazing that it's still around here
Yes,
almost 45 years later.
absolutely, absolutely. And that's one of the things I often thought, that Action was a guerrilla organization, because just like the Rady Rape Crisis Center, the Atlanta Women's Network, the Battered Women's Shelter, a lot of organizations were spun off through the energy of Action and the various members. And we did not look to get credit necessarily, our name recognition. I mean, we didn't want to hold them. We were wanting them to be successful and uh, get their own set of leaders and move forward. And so a lot of organizations were created independently.
So what do you see then as kind of like the long-term impact that action has had on women here in Georgia or the women's movement generally?
Oh my goodness, that's a challenging question. Clearly, I think the fact that we are still in association, the people who were involved, and continue to evolve our life. And um, I I know, support each other, support the things that we're still involved in or concerned about, or just support each other from an individual perspective. I know when I was in New York, this is a minor thing, but I was looking to do uh, something with work. I can't even remember now what it was. And it was graphically oriented. And I remember I called, I don't know if it was Janet Reckman or someone who had helped with our graphics in Action. And I was asking her advice on colors and whatever. And she was quite willing to give me her opinion on that. So I think all of us, I mean, Suzanne is a striking example, leaving her job and going to Wharton. Uh, big deal decision to make. And so personally, I think we all gained a great deal from our experiences. And I I clearly think that the people who attended, um, I don't know if there's been any dialogue coming from the Political Action Conference. We also did a one-day seminar for women running for office. And we wrote a note and said, what is your position on these issues and whatever. And we picked 4 or 5 women. And then one woman from Columbus came up. No big deal. She drove up for a day to sit in, and she was a librarian. I think she was a librarian, Mary Jane Gaylor. And she wasn't happy with her representative and did not think that he was doing that good a job. And so she decided to run for office. She'd never run for any office before. And she gained tremendously from that one day that we put together. She thought it was wonderful. And she served in the legislature. She won, and she served in the legislature for a number of years. So, how do you judge, what impact our small effort to support her in the beginning had, the fact that she was in the legislature for a number of years and voting on things and proposing legislation, et cetera. And Kathy Steinberg was another one who was in that group and went on for a long career in the legislature. So um, I think we helped to move the needle forward in bigger ways for women through helping the people get into office that shared a concern and a desire to make things different. And I think, like my poor boss, who uh, had trouble reconciling exactly what we were trying to do. I think making those calls on businesses, we began to slowly give people something to think about and made them pause. Uh, so we had impact. Um, but I think the biggest impact was the women, giving women an opportunity to take some leadership roles and do things that perhaps they hadn't had an opportunity to do in their job. Dolores Pringle is another one. I mean, she went to be president of the organization, and I I'm not sure if I met her at the it was the national, not the national, it was put on by the state, and they were, Suzanne and others went to Texas for that. I had a table there, people coming through with things about action. It was soliciting new members. I think I met Dolores Pringle there. I think that was where she got introduced to the organization, and she uh, just talked to her. I don't think she said very much. I just did my little sales speech of what we were about, and if she was interested in doing anything, and met her later. And I think she took a role in the as a committee chair for the Women at Work conference, was her first assignment. So um, that's uh, that's my thoughts. I mean, we did get the rape crisis, the rape law changed. That was us, pure and simple. We did that. Um, and so
No, those are all just amazing contributions to women here in Georgia and helping propel them forward in achieving greater opportunities. So, as you left Action, then, could you speak to us a little bit about what you've gone on to do since leaving Action, since your career took you to New York, and could you just share with us kind of where your life went after you left the Atlanta area?
sure. So I really I was a part of IBM hadn't hired for a little while, and I went into service, not into sales. And the they gave each region two headcounts. So I and a guy were hired, and Georgia State didn't have a employment group. I don't even know what you call it, a job. Uh, they had one for undergraduates, but they didn't have one for graduates. And I was riding the bus into town for my job with the lady who was responsible for creating the graduate job skills bank for Georgia State. And she said, you graduated from Georgia State. They didn't have any resume. She said, give me your resume, which I did. So it just happened that the guy who had a headcount in Atlanta decided he wanted to make a special effort to see if there would be a woman that would fit the criteria. And so he commissioned the HR guy to go get him some women's resumes. He went to Georgia State and he got mine. There wasn't many to choose from. And I got a call on a Saturday night, which I thought was a hokey call, that IBM would like to interview me. So anyway, so that was how and this is the same man who asked about Toastmasters that hired me. So anyway, but if he had not decided that he wanted to have some women candidates, so he made a conscious decision to make sure there were women resumes in his pool that he was going to look at. I would not have been hired. So anyway, so I never thought I wanted to work for big business. I went for anybody who interviewed, anybody who called me for an interview, I went, but I didn't really feel like I wanted to. So we courted for like 3 months or more. I was employed. It was fine by me. And then at the end, he offered me a job. And I interviewed the region manager. I interviewed first line manager. I can't even tell you how many people talked to me. And I swung by after visiting one of the Head Start centers. It was lunchtime, and I was headed back to the office. He'll offer me the job. I'll go back and I'll tell him I'll get back to him. He expected me to say yes. And when I didn't say yes, why? What are you concerned about? What's whatever? And I thought I was going to faint because I hadn't had any lunch. And I thought, don't faint. This will be not a good impression. Anyway, I managed to get out of there and I ultimately did accept the job. The role was to train technically, but to go into management. And the role was if you didn't go into management, they didn't feel you had technical skills and they really didn't want to keep you. So you either made manager or you didn't. That was the concept of the program. And I thought I would make manager within the Southeast, which was the region I was a part of. Lo and behold, and a guy who's a good friend of mine was hired at the same time. He was in one branch, I was in the other. We both went to basic training together. We were friends. I invited him to Feminist Action Alliance activities. Anyway, he gets to New York within a year. I think I'm here for at least 2. And they put him in he is an instructor in management. I'm trying to think, did they make him a manager? He had been a manager maybe for a year. They make him an instructor in the school. I haven't even made manager yet. Anyway, ultimately, I'm offered not a manager's job, a staff job in New York. I take it. And then from there, I am in a year or two, I'm offered a management job in Wall Street, Lower Manhattan, in the brokerage branch. And the guy that is the branch manager is crew cut, military background. And what I learned is I thought New York was more forward thinking about this. There had been no women managers in New York. I was the first female manager in New York. I didn't know that at the time. I really did not. I was surprised. I knew Atlanta didn't, not Atlanta, but the South didn't, but I really thought it would be different there. So my interview was difficult with this branch manager. And I really felt that this was an exercise and they didn't have a job and they were just putting me through something. I talked to the regional guy and I said, do you really have a job or is this an exercise? Why do you say that? He and that guy didn't get along, I learned, and there really was a job. But again, he wanted me to come down, the branch manager wanted me, I was in White Plains. So I had to come down to Grand Central and then take the subway down to Lower Manhattan. He wanted me to do that in rush hour to be sure that I would know what I was getting into and that I was willing to do this. Long story. Um, my branch manager loved my friend Jeff from Atlanta. Little did I know this. But he was advisory or something to the management school. And so he had met Jeff. So we were having a big party at the World Trade Center, and I invited Jeff as my date. When he saw on the you submitted your names or so. When my branch manager saw that I was inviting Jeff, he comes into my office. Oh, you know Jeff. Anyway, so that's that. But I got my first line management job. And then I got another job in Poughkeepsie, first line manager, 80 miles one way on the Taconic Parkway, which is a winding road through. I used up all my 9 lives. And then I got another job in New Jersey, first line manager, living in the same place in White Plains. And then another job back in Poughkeepsie, and then another job back in Franklin Lakes. And then I wanted a second line manager's job. I wanted to manage managers. And I ultimately got that job in Minnesota. And um, the then I got a director's job in Kansas City. And later on, ultimately, that office closed because we were consolidating. And I think I saw some of my personnel records as we were closing out things. Anyway, I was underpaid pretty much. I'd have to think of all those years. How long were those years? 10 years or more, maybe. But in most management positions, I had been promoted. And you anticipate you come in at the bottom laying. If you're promoted very fairly quickly or something, you might be, but you should get bigger raises to get you up higher in the range. And funny how things work. There was a guy that was a vice president back in New York. I was personally acquainted with outside of the office as well as in the office, and he had wound up marrying a friend of mine. And he took the initiative to approve a higher than normal raise. I can't remember what it was exactly. But my boss was a woman. It was a woman who was the area manager. She did not propose or wasn't taking the initiative to try to get my raise, my pay more in line with where it ought to be. But it was interesting. It was this guy back in New York who actually uh, suggested and initiated something as a improvement. So anyway, so um, so that was my career. I ultimately got back to Atlanta with IBM and had a number of different positions and different good bosses. Always, I'm trying to think. Often was the only woman in as my peers. Not always, but often. And I won the first, I went into outsourcing when it was new in the 90s, I guess. And I won our first big um, telecom industry deal with Ameritech, which was the Midwestern AT&T function. And it was like 2 years at least. I was moving into my house in Atlanta when the truck was unloading and I was doing conference calls about this deal. And I took it all the way through, all the hard road. Every time we thought we'd won, they asked for something else. And we went through. And then in the end, they went, okay, you got to buy from me. And then I had to manage on the being a buyer from them after being a seller to them. And and at the end, IBM brings in this guy that had been my peer, I don't know, 4 or 5 years earlier. I can't remember. They were going to take the client to St. Louis for a review. And to see what we were doing there. He was in St. Louis. And they asked him to put the thing together for the, that's okay, that's reasonable. But ultimately, they started giving, they started pushing me back and giving him more of the responsibility. This was a big deal. I'm trying to remember how big. It was several $100 million deal. There's a big commission coming out of this deal and a lot of recognition because it was the first telecom deal we won. And I know I was in Kentucky and on the board, and we were working this deal, and his name was up at the top of the deal. He wasn't even in the meeting. And I remember asking, I guess it was my boss at the time, it was, why is his name up there? And I didn't get a good answer. So anyway, so just to tell you that after all of that, I know he got a big piece of my commission. And I worked 2 years on that deal. He worked a few months. And it was a lot of nights, weekends. I would leave out on a Sunday. I'd get in very late on a Friday. Sometimes it was so late I didn't fly back till Saturday. Sometimes I stayed over on the weekend. Uh, so, but you can't manage that. I mean, you can't manage how they are going to respond. So I just, how were things? Things were good, but there were also things that were not good and not fair, I would say. So anyway, but a good career, and I never would have thought. I stayed with IBM for 33 some odd years. I never would have thought, but they gave you lots of freedom. You got to run your own show as a manager, and as long as you produced how you produce, they really let you go. So I have no complaints, but there was problems along the way.
No, that obviously as being a part of the women's movement early on in the 1970s, and still finding that that was something you had to continually work through. Um, and it's frustrating. You know, as women, we want equality, we want opportunity, and the same benefits and freedoms. And it's frustrating that those things still aren't in place today.
Yeah, I'm not sure how things are today, but I suspect it's still not necessarily even kill. Uh,
No, there's still, especially in certain industries, just not as many women. And so just I think continuing on in the fashion that Action did and promoting opportunities and encouraging women into professions that are non-traditional, showing them how to enter into politics or make connections, all of those are still crucial to women today. And
yeah, there's still
uh,
opportunity for
yeah,
improvement.
absolutely. Is there anything else that you would like to share with me about your time with Action or any final thoughts?
I just think, again, I don't have anything to say as to why, but to put on the conferences we put on while we had full-time jobs and the complexity of the logistics and the graphics and the program and all the other kind of stuff, publicity. To put those on in a year is a big commitment to do those things. And we um, we quickly made decisions, and we were most of our energy was how to implement, how to execute, not what we should do. We really didn't put a lot of energy into what we should do. For some reason, we coalesced fairly quickly under political action or women at work or network or whatever. Um, we we yes. And so then the energy was, okay, how did we make it happen? And And so I think we were fortunate, and we didn't debate. We didn't debate a lot. Are we going to take this person? Or are we not going to take this person? Or what's the pro and con or whatever? For whatever reason, the people we had leading up the different topics, someone was supposed to get the speakers, someone was working on the programs, and they kind of we just didn't have conflict. I don't know what to attribute that to, but we had competent people. When they said they were going to do something, they did it, which is hard in organizations, but pretty much we didn't have people fall out. They finished their job. And at an executive or leadership area, we didn't have a lot of challenges of, I don't think we should do that. We should do this, or we should do it this way, not this way. Um, so like I said, I think that's unique. For whatever reason, we didn't have those internal debates that take up time and energy and source. So our energy was spent outward, and it was um, in a coordinated fashion. We didn't work against each other in an innocent way. We didn't work against each other. We directed our energy outward and worked very efficiently with things. And so I think it was just the personalities that were attracted to action. It's the only thing I can think of. We didn't have people throwing darts, or you didn't do it this way, or you should have done it that way. That never came up for whatever reason. And so I think those golden years, I've forgotten how many there were, 8 or 9 or 10 or so, 73, they said we started. So 73 to, I don't even think the organization lasted 10 years.
83. Yeah, it was
It go,
10 full years.
um, but so it was uh, avoided some of the things that sap energy away. And like I said, we had a lot of leaders, a lot of very competent people who would take secondary roles to make things happen. And I don't think that happens very often. Once the person is the leader, it's hard for them to step into another role supporting someone else. And we didn't, the people involved didn't have that as a concern. So um, dynamics, personalities, I think worked well in this particular organization. I don't know. What do you think from your reading?
I think exactly what you just said. You guys were women that organized professionally. Every correspondence I've read, nothing but true uh, uh, encouragement to women, also support and gratitude towards those who supported the work, and especially those in leadership positions, either businesses or within the government. It was always a sense of developing connection, building camaraderie, and really trying to further the work of women. And that's seen through everything I've seen so far and everyone I've interviewed. So thank you so much for
Oh, you're
sharing
quite welcome. You're quite
your
welcome.
story.
Thank you for the work you're doing. Look forward to the results. Thank you.